Good morning. Mike Van Amburgh here. I'm going to talk to you about our latest update to the CNCPS. We're going to update this version because we've built a new submodel, and we're going to talk about microbial requirements or bacterial requirements for isoacids and how that fits into diet formulation. So let's get started here. Where did we come up with this idea of branch chain VFAs? Well, this is not new. Quite frankly, this is something I've been wanting to do since probably 2008. We've known for a long time, since 1960, we've known that the fibrolytic bacteria have a requirement for branch chain VFAs because they don't have the capacity to make branch chain amino acids very efficiently, and they don't have the ability to uptake branch chain amino acids or peptides like some of the amylolytic bacteria. Okay. So we've known this. We've known there's been this obligate requirement. We have essentially used nothing but nitrogen as the requirement for all bacteria in the rumen, and we know this is an underestimation of the true requirements because of this missing piece in terms of the branch chain amino acids and the branch chain VFAs. You know, back in the days when we had CPM dairy and earlier versions of the CNCPS, and we focused a lot on peptides, that peptide requirement was driven by the amylolytic bacteria, not the fiber bacteria, but it caused us to overfeed peptides, which allowed us to meet the requirements for these branch chain VFAs for the fiber bugs. But it was way too much nitrogen, right? And we're in the period where we need to reduce nitrogen. So we have nitrogen intake and excretion, that is. So we have this information now where we know this is an obligate requirement. We've been wanting to do this for a while. And I'm happy that we finally have, with the leadership of Andrew Lapierre, we finally have a submodel that I think is going to, you know, in a first pass is going to work pretty well to help us identify some of these requirements and maybe make some more efficient diets. All right. So to talk about that, I want to go through what do we currently do in 655. Okay. I think everybody knows this, but a refresher is probably important. Right. So you know, without a whole lot of forethought here in terms of KD over KD plus KP, you know, and what I mean by that is we've been using this approach since the inception of the model, right? We will estimate the rumen degradable carbohydrate pool size, we'll assign rates to that, we'll assign a competition to that with adding in the passage rate. From that allows us to estimate the bacterial growth calculations, which then allows us to calculate the energy allowable bacteria, right? And right now, this is kind of, it's not siloed, but this is how we make all these calculations. This is true in version 6 as it is in the upcoming version 7, right? So this process won't change. And we assume that the rate of digestion is directly related to the rate of bacterial growth. And then, once we have the energy allowable bacteria, we look at the dietary ammonia, we look at the dietary degradable protein, and we look at recycling, and use the estimations of those three to determine our total nitrogen supply, which then allows us to calculate our nitrogen allowable bacteria based on the bacterial nitrogen content, right? And for years, this is how we've done this. So when you put a diet together and you see a rumen ammonia balance of 120 or 180, what that's telling you is you're at least 20 to 80% above the energy allowable bacteria, which means you've got plenty of nitrogen to meet the carbohydrate driven microbial growth, right? So nitrogen will not be limiting. if your rumen nitrogen balance was negative, say it's 90%, that means this compartment is going to be first limiting, so you can't make enough bacteria, even though you've got all this energy available to do that. Okay, and again, this is not new. If we look at our carbohydrate fractionation in the CNCPS, we've got our A1 and our VFAs, our A2 and our lactate, and A3 other organic acids, so there's our A fraction. Plus we have the sugars and the fructans, and then we have the starches, we have the soluble fibers, and then we have the cellulose and hemicellulose, or the NDF, and then our C fraction, right? This requirement for branched chains is primarily driven by this digestible NDF fraction, right? So this is the pool we're most concerned about when trying to meet these requirements. However, these are the bacteria that degrade, the starches are the ones that produce them, and they can be opportunistic, and they can make it and take it back again. So that's the tricky part about doing this, right? But the carbohydrate demand side here, mostly in the B3, is what's going to drive the requirements for these branched chain VFAs. And then again, a refresher on how do we calculate microbial yield or bacterial yield. All right, as I said earlier, the fermentable carbohydrate pools dictate the bacterial growth. We get, which then assign a KD. All right, everybody's pretty familiar with that. And the KD over the KP gives us the extent, right? This will give us the extent of digestion in the rumen. This passage rate, as I think everybody's aware, is assigned based on the forage concentrate designation. And things like body weight and dry matter intake are crucial at being able to predict this passage rate, right? Something, the dry matter intake's easier to get than the body weight. We still struggle to get good body weights on cows. Our forage passage rate, we did borrow from the Norfor model. That's a long discussion, but here's the passage rate equation. Notice dry matter intake, ANDFOM intake, dry matter intake, and full body weight. So, those three things are really important. So if somebody tells me, I don't think my passage rate equations are working right, the first thing I'm going to ask is, or first thing we should ask is, do you have good dry matter intakes? Do you have good feed chemistry? Do you know what the body weight is of the cows you're feeding? All right, because those are going to be really important in this calculation. Right? Once we have that and we know how much carbohydrate can be digested, we can now go ahead and calculate how many grams of bacteria we can have, right? And this is the equation, Km is the maintenance requirement of the bacteria, Kd is the rate of digestion of the carbohydrate, and we make the assumption that this is directly correlated with the rate of microbial growth or bacterial growth. And then we have 1 over the Y max. Yg is the maximum amount of bacteria that can be generated per hour from this carbohydrate digestion. And right now, in version 6.5, it's 0.4 grams of bacteria per gram of carbohydrate per hour. And so that's our maximum yield. And then we're going to do this for all the pools, right? And as all this, every feed ingredient is assigned a bacterial growth coefficient based on its rate of digestion, right? So this is how we create the demand function, because this rate of digestion, the amount of bacteria, is going to create the demand for both the nitrogen and these branch chain VFAs. All right, so once we've done all of this, and we've, for all the carbohydrate fractions in each feed, we look at the rumen degradable, or rumen digestible carbohydrate pool times the growth coefficient gives us the energy allowable bacteria. So in this particular case, the energy allowable bacteria for the fiber carbohydrate pools is 951 grams. The total energy allowable for the NFC bacteria is 3,326. right? There's going to be a little difference there. The fiber bugs are slower, have a lower maintenance requirement, but don't move as fast. So that's usually how this works. It's about a 1/3, 2/3 relationship. And then historically, what we've done, right, is once we calculate the energy, now we calculate the amount of nitrogen available for those microbes. What do they need to be able to digest that carbohydrate? When we think about the nitrogen sources, the amino acid nitrogen is sourced from the diet. The ammonia nitrogen is sourced from the diet and the animal. In other words, there's going to be some deamination of protein in the rumen. That's going to create ammonia. That's going to leave the rumen, go to the liver, be converted to urea, and either recycle back into the gastrointestinal tract or be excreted in the urine or the milk. Okay, so we've got some of that interaction going on here. If we think about the NFC bacteria, they can take up amino acid nitrogen for their requirement. That's one of their ecological niches, is that because they can move fast and they've got carbohydrate that digests quickly, they've evolved the ability to take up peptides and amino acids. So about 2/3 of their requirement can come from amino acid nitrogen. The other third will come from ammonia. They can always use ammonia if they don't have the peptides. They're just more efficient if they have these peptides. This is where there's a big difference in the ability to compete within the rumen, because the fiber carbohydrate bacteria can only use ammonia nitrogen to meet their requirement. And this, again, is ignoring the fact that they have an obligate requirement for branched chain VFAs to make their branched chain amino acids and be more efficient. So this is what we're trying to correct here, because we've driven all of their requirements from this ammonia nitrogen. So once you do this, right, so if we go through an example diet here, here's energy allowable bacteria, dry matter intake, energy allowable bacteria at 4218, nitrogen allowable bacteria at 5,377. So on the surface, this says, hey, we've got we got lots of energy, we got plenty of nitrogen. There should not be any limitations for carbohydrate digestion or bacterial growth in this diet, because we've got good energy availability, but we've also got good nitrogen availability. So we should see optimum bacterial growth here, because there should be no reduction in fermentable or fiber carbohydrate digestion. But then that leads us to these branched chains, right? So I just gave you a scenario where it looked like we had plenty of nitrogen to meet those carbohydrate demands for growth, microbial growth. Here we've got leucine, isoleucine, and valine. And what the bacteria are going to do, right? There's the hydrocarboxyl units. There's the ammonia or the amines, right? What the bacteria are going to do is they're going to knock off these ammonias, these amine units, and they're going to put on an oxygen. They're going to make it a keto or a carboxyl acid, and that's going to allow the amylolytic bacteria are going to do that, and that's going to allow those fibrolytic bacteria to uptake these and then interconvert them to amino acids within their system, right? So we had worked on this model for the last couple years. We've had feedback, so we're comfortable where some of this is, but these changes are exclusively part of the ruminal predictions, and it really comes down to bacterial growth related to carbohydrate fermentation, specifically in the NDF pool. Okay. So as we pointed out here just a few minutes ago, here's our energy calculations for energy allowable bacteria. Here's our nitrogen calculations. What we've added is a competing, not a competing, but a, not getting my words this morning, a complementary submodel that's going to now estimate the amount of branched chain VFAs available for those fibrolytic bacteria. So how do we get our branched chain VFA supply? Well, we do it through bacterial turnover, right? The bacteria will grow up and they're going to die, and they're going to leave residue behind. So that's going to be true protein. Protozoa are going to eat some. They're going to turn stuff over. Protozoa are going to die, right? They're also going to give some up, and even though we don't have protozoa in 6.5, 6 yet, we can account for some of that. We're going to have the peptide balance, which we've always talked about, and then we have the opportunity for exogenous supplementation, right, by a couple different means. That gets us to the bacterial branched chain amino acid profile, which then gets us to the branched chain VFA allowable bacteria. And this again is about the fiber carbohydrate digesting bacteria. So now what you're going to have is you're still going to have the same calculation for energy allowable. We're going to have the same calculation for nitrogen and ammonia allowable, but now we're going to have alongside this prediction for branched chain VFAs, right? And that's going to hopefully add some clarity to some of the diets in these high producing cows that we see across the country. All right, so now we come back to that same diet where we had, 27 kilos of intake. We had, 4,218 grams of energy allowable bacteria, 5,377 grams of nitrogen allowable bacteria. Everything looks good, right? That's 120, 130% of the requirement. Everything should be fine. But when we run the branched chain VFA allowable, all of a sudden we find out we're at 4,053, right? So we're deficient by about 165 grams of bacterial allowable growth, right? So that's a problem, and we need some more of those branched chain VFAs if we're going to digest that carbohydrate effectively, right? And that's the difference here, right? If we look at 4218, 5377, 4053, we have seen this in the field. I have solved some problems for nutritionists in central New York who have observed these problems or these deficiencies before we had the submodel, right? Before we had the submodel, we had to kind of make some back of the envelope calculations, but getting the soluble true protein a little bit higher in some of those diets increased the energetic and nitrogen efficiency of those diets and the productivity of the cows. Okay. So now what we're doing is we're looking at energy allowable. Is that less than nitrogen allowable? All right, so we have sufficient nitrogen to ferment the carbohydrates. If energy allowable is greater than nitrogen allowable, then we have reduced bacterial growth to a level that the nitrogen supports. Fiber carbohydrate bacteria reduced fiber degradation. In this case, now we have energy allowable less than the branched chain VFA allowable. Hey, we can ferment all of that digestible NDF. If it's the reverse, now all of a sudden we're going to have a reduction in the amount of fiber carbohydrate bacteria that can be produced, and that's going to reduce NDF digestion in the cow, right? So 656 will utilize the minimum, either energy, nitrogen, or branched chain VFA bacteria nutrient support to estimate bacterial flow. But remember, the bacterial flow on the branched chain VFAs is really for the digestible NDF. It's not all carbohydrate pools, it's really the digestible NDF. So if we look at an example diet one more time, just a little more resolution here. If we look at branched chain amino acids, and their availability, there's their branch chain VFAs. So you got leucine, isoleucine, and valine. You've got isovaline, 2-methylbutyrate, and isobutyrate. Here's an estimated requirements for those isoacids. Here's an estimated supply. It says we're a little bit deficient on 2-methylbutyrate and isobutyrate. Our energy allowable bacteria 4580, nitrogen 5400 over 5500, branch chain amino acid allowable 4430, right? We calculated that up here. So if you're trying to achieve 97 pounds of milk, but you're not able to do that, one of the things that might be going on that we have not had the ability to detect is this branch chain amino acid limitation, right? So it says, hey, you're going to be short, about 4 to 5 mcals or pounds of ME or MP allowable milk because of this deficiency. So now we're going to come in, we're going to add some isoacids, get your branch chain amino acid allowable bacteria up to 4600. Now that's in excess of the energy allowable bacteria. Now you're able to achieve that 97 pounds of milk that you've been trying to formulate, because now your ME and your MP line up. Okay? So again, it's the same kind of accounting that we've been doing for years. We've just added a requirement that's been ignored. It won't change a lot of your diets, but it may tell you, hey, here's one of the things that's first limiting, and it's just gone undetected, right? So when are things going to tell you it's likely an isoacid deficiency? Well, when there's high rumen fermentable carbohydrates, diets, and these are new ways of looking at these numbers, right? So everybody's going to have to kind of change their perspective just a little bit. Diets that are greater than or equal to 14% dry matter fermentable NDF can have appreciable branch chain VFA requirements. Diets that are greater than 42% of the dry matter fermentable carbohydrates can limit isoacid supply. Right, and what that means is there's less branch chain VFA cross-feeding to the fibrocarbohydrate bacteria from the amylolytic bacteria. In other words, those amylolytic bacteria, because they produce the isoacids, are also opportunistic. So if they have plenty of starch and sugar to digest, they might make those isoacids, but they're going to take them right back quickly because that's their ecological niche and how they're going to outcompete everybody. That creates a deficiency for these fiber digesting bacteria. The other reason you might see a limitation is your degradable protein nitrogen status. And this is going to change here a little bit, where we'll continue to talk about the protein pools the way we always have relative to the fermentable carbohydrate pools. But what's been instituted is this thing called the true RDP. Right? And the true RDP is the true soluble protein, right, or the total soluble protein minus the ammonia, right? And we want this number right now to be greater than 9% of the dry matter. In the current version of the model, we want the rumen ammonia requirement to be greater than 125%. We find that if that goes much below 125%, what's happening, ancillarily, what's happening is that you're not going to have enough true RDP, right? So we're going to peg that at 125 or greater. 125 to 130 is a great place to be. And then you're going to reconcile your branch chain amino acid branch chain VFA balances by evaluating the degradable amino acids in the rumen. Again, grams of total of true rumen degradable protein per kilogram of fermentable carbohydrate, somewhere between 185 and 215, or grams of true RDP per pound of fermentable carbohydrate, somewhere between 84 and 98. It depends on how you're looking at your numbers, right? If you're using metric, it's 185 to 215. If you're using pounds, it's 84 to 98. Let us know if you have any questions. This is a refinement. It shouldn't disturb a lot of diets, but it might clarify a bunch of things for you. Thanks.